In this exercise, we're going to show how the CMS DSynPuff claims data can be utilized to identify how to determine high outpatient utilizers using the outpatient claims data and beneficiary summary file. To begin, we're using a sample of data from the 2008 CMS DSynPuff file for the beneficiary summary data, and we're using a sample of data for the outpatient claims data. Let's begin by showing how to open this data using Microsoft Excel. To begin, we open up a blank spreadsheet in Microsoft Excel and we import the data here. The reason we do this, rather than opening up the CSV file by double-clicking on the CSV icon to automatically have it open in Excel, is because the CSV file, if there are fields that contain leading zeros, they will be stripped if you let Excel determine the data types. In the way we're going to open up this file, we're actually going to specify the data types for some of the columns of data so that the data is imported properly. So the way we're going to do this is we're going to select the Data tab in Microsoft Excel. And under the Data tab, there is an option to get external data. We will be selecting from text. Now what we need to do is we need to direct Excel to open up one of the CSV files. We're going to begin with the 2008 beneficiary summary file, sample 1. And then click Import. Now we go through a text import wizard where we have to select specific options to identify the separators for each column of data and also specify the types of data. So we're going to begin by ensuring that the radio button for delimited is selected, and this is selected because we have commas that are delimiting each of the fields. We also want to ensure that the checkbox for My Data has headers is selected. This indicates that the first row in our data includes the names of the columns. Then click Next. And we then have to specify the type of delimiter. This is not a tab delimited file. We have to uncheck tab. And the type of delimiter is comma. It's a CSV file. It's a comma separated values file. And after we do that, you can see that the data preview splits each of the fields into the respective columns. And then click Next. Now we can go through this option of selecting the fields and specifying the data format. So there's two fields we want to change the format from general to text. And those fields include for the column header of SP_state_code and BNY_county code. This includes a code for the state and county for where the beneficiary is located. And because, as you can see from this 06, there are leading zeros, we want to ensure that those leading zeros are not removed when we import the data. So if we just click here on where it says General, and then come up and select Text from the radio button, you'll see that instead of saying General, it now says Text. And that will allow us to retain those leading zeros. We're going to do the same for this column for the county ID, which specifies an ID for the county where the beneficiary resides. Now after we do that, we can click Finish. And it will prompt us with a question of where we want to import this data. We could just select the existing worksheet as the default with the first cell selected, and then we can click OK. This will take a moment to process, given that there's quite a bit of data. And once it is imported, you'll see that each of the columns are separated accordingly, and we have each of the rows. And we can identify how many rows we have in the data by just clicking into cell A. And then you can see at the bottom in this green toolbar the number of rows that appear. So there are 116,353 rows. This indicates there's that number of unique beneficiaries for the year 2008. Now let's make sure we just save this. And we can save it to just a known location. And I'm going to change it and save it as an Excel workbook. Okay. The next thing we want to do is we want to undergo a similar process by opening up a new spreadsheet of data. But in this spreadsheet, instead of importing the beneficiary summary file, we will import the outpatient claims data. Again, select Delimiter. Also select the checkbox for my data has headers, then click Next. Now we want to ensure that it's comma delimited, and then click Next. And in this case, we aren't going to be too concerned with the way the data is formatted. Certainly we could go through the motions of ensuring that all the diagnosis codes are formatted as text, but we will not be using that data for this exercise, so we're going to ignore that step. However, if you were doing this on your own claims data, you would want to go through the motions of ensuring that the data where there's a possibility for leading zeros are classified as text rather than as general. Then click Finish. And again, we want to just keep the default as such and click OK. Okay, as you can see, the data is separated into the appropriate columns, and if we just click on this first column here, you can see that there are 790,791 rows of data, and this indicates, each row in this data indicates a number of claims. So you could have the same beneficiary have a more than one claim, or there are certain beneficiaries here that may not have any claims. So for the first thing we want to do is we want to actually sort this data and eliminate any data that does not exist for year 2008. So the way we're going to do this is we're actually going to include a new column of data, and I'm just going to include it here for in next to column G, and go to click on column G, right click, and select Insert. And what we'll be entering here is year. What this will allow us to do is I want to be able to pull from this claim date the year the year of the claim. And the reason for this is we only want to include data from 2008. The date we're going to use is actually the claim through date to pull out the year, as the claim through date would be what's indicated for when the claim indicates that the claim is from the year of 2008. So the way to only pull out this year from this date is, given that this data is in a format where the first 4 characters of this string include the year, we can actually just use a formula in Excel to only pull the first 4 characters from this date. So the way we'll do that is in cell G2 we'll include a formula. The formula is equals left, and this just returns a specified number of characters starting from the left of that text string. And then we use an open parentheses. We need to select the text, which is going to be in cell E2, and then a comma, and then the number of characters. Now, the number of characters is 4, and what that indicates is we want to include the first 4 characters from the left in, we want to return that text. Then when you close your parentheses and click Enter, you can see that 2008 is returned. Now, if I move my cursor to the lower right-hand side of this cell, you'll see it turn into bold crosshairs. Once it turns into that bold crosshairs, I'll double-click. And this will carry that formula down for the rest of the spreadsheet. Now, one thing I want to do is right now, each of these cells includes a formula. And what I want to do is I want to retain the values for the year, but I want to remove the formula. So the reason to do this is so we can minimize the processing power required to work with this data, because when there's a formula included in the spreadsheet, it certainly increases the size of that spreadsheet, and it's more labor intensive for our computer to be able to work in this spreadsheet. So to minimize the possibility of a crash in Microsoft Excel, I want to remove the formulas. So I'm going to highlight column G, and then what I will do is I will right-click and select Copy, and then I'm going to overwrite column C. So I'll right-click again, and there's these paste options. One of these options is this Paste Special as Values. When I click on that, what that will do is it will take the values that appeared in the spreadsheet and just paste those values rather than retaining the formula. So now you can see when I click into the cell, it only includes the year rather than the formula. Now, one thing I want to do from here is I will go up to just click somewhere in my data, make sure nothing is highlighted. Just select somewhere in my data, and I'm going to sort this data by the year so that the lowest year appears first and the most recent year appears last. So I will go up to under the Data tab, there's the Sort option, and we will sort by year. And it's saying values because it's still recognizing that year as a text rather than as a number, but we can correct that in the sorting. So if we just click OK, there will be a prompt, and it's a warning saying that appears to be some information here that looks to be like a number. Do you want to sort it as a number? And we do want it sorted as a number rather than as text. So we have this radio button for this first option selected and click OK. This might take a moment to process, given that there's a lot of data in this spreadsheet, so be patient. Now this data is sorted by year, with 2008 being displayed first, and anything after that displaying second or last. What we want to do here is we want to remove any rows of data where the year is 2009, where it's anything other than 2008. So it could be 2009, 2010, or possibly it could be blank. So the way to do this quickly is to be able to just highlight column G, and if you go up to the Home tab and select this Find and Select, what you can do is you can find the first instance of 2009. So just type in 2009 and click Find Next. And this will find the row with the first instance of 2009. So if I just highlight this row, and then I scroll all the way to the bottom of my data, and hold down the Shift key on my keyboard, and then select this last row of data. This will highlight all of those rows of data between the first and last one that I selected. Now I can right-click and then choose Delete. You will get a warning saying that there's a lot of data here. If you delete this, we can't undo it. Are you certain you want to do this? And we do, in fact, want to do this, so we can click OK. Now, the data included in the spreadsheet includes just claims from the year 2008. Now, let's save this data. This includes outpatient claims data as well. So we can actually utilize this outpatient claims data in concert with the beneficiary summary file to be able to identify how many claims each of the beneficiaries had in 2008. So what we're going to do is we're going to adjust the look of our screen here so that the claims data is shown on the right side. So just grab the toolbar at the top and then click on down on your left mouse and then drag this window over to the right side of your screen. Once you see this blue box appear on let go of your mouse, and that will rearrange the window for that spreadsheet to move to the right of your screen. Do the same with the beneficiary summary file, and that will move it to the left. And what we can do is we can include a new column of data here. Let's actually just put it in column B, and we're going to do that in the beneficiary summary file. And with this column of data, we're going to count the number of claims that occur in the claims spreadsheet. So we'll label this column number claims. So the way we're going to do this is we have this DSynPuff ID, and you can see this first DSynPuff ID occurs in the beneficiary summary file and also occurs here in this claims file. So what we want to do is we want to see how often that DSynPuff ID in the beneficiary summary file occurs in the claims file. And what this does is this will indicate the number of claims each of the beneficiaries have for outpatient. So we can be able to identify the high utilizers, or the beneficiaries that have the highest number of claims. So under this new column labeled number claims, I'm going to include a formula. It's the COUNTIF formula. The way this works is put an equal sign and type in COUNTIF. And this essentially counts the number of cells in a specified range that meet a specific criteria. So in the example, the range I want to select is actually the first column, the DSynPuff ID, from the claims spreadsheet. So I'm going to click over to this other spreadsheet and highlight column A. And you'll see that this enters in a range into my formula, and then I'll just type in a comma. And for the criteria, the value I want to count within that range is going to be my DSynPuff ID for the row that I'm located in the beneficiary summary file. So that will be cell A2. And then I will put a closed parentheses and hit enter. As you can see, the 1 is returned. This indicates that this particular beneficiary had only one outpatient claim. So what I'll do is I'll go back into this cell, and I want to copy this formula all the way down for this spreadsheet in the beneficiary summary file. So I'll make sure my cursor is moved to the bottom right-hand side of this cell until it turns into a bold crosshair, and then double-click. This might take a moment to process, given that there's a lot of data here, so please be patient, and we will see what the results are once it's done processing. Okay, now that the formula is completed, again what we want to do is we want to copy this column of data and paste special as values. So I'm going to select column B, right-click, copy, then again right-click into column B and select the option to paste special as values. When that is completed, let's ensure that we save the spreadsheet. Now, we are finished with the Claims 2008 spreadsheet, so we can close that out and maximize the beneficiary summary file. One thing to note is if I just highlight column B, you can get some summary statistics here. First, you can see that the average is 2.4, meaning that on average, for the beneficiaries for claims made in 2008, the average number of claims associated with outpatient is 2.4. If we look at the maximum, the maximum was 33, meaning the highest number of beneficiary claims for any beneficiary was 33. We're going to be running some additional summary statistics on this column of data here shortly. One thing that you'll note with this data is that there's information regarding the prevalence of chronic conditions, as well as information on the Medicare reimbursement for inpatient, outpatient, carrier claims. we're going to actually look at the financial data from the Medicare reimbursement for the outpatient claims and associate that to the number of claims for the patients. Then we're going to slice that data to determine if the differences in the number of claims is associated with the presence of a chronic condition. The way we're going to do this is create some pivot tables. So click anywhere in this spreadsheet of data so that entire column is not highlighted, and then go to the Insert tab and select Pivot Table. From here, we want to ensure that the radio button is selected for Select a Table or Range. It should automatically find the range of our spreadsheet. We're also going to create this in a new spreadsheet. Then click OK. For our first example, what we're going to do is let's just create a summary of the number of claims based off of whether the patient is male or female. So we're going to take the beneficiary sex identification code. We're going to move that into the rows bin. If we need to know what these the 1 and 2 signify, we can look at the code book to identify that. But I know from previously looking at that code book that 1 is indicative of male and 2 of female. Next, we're going to move the number of claims to the values bin. By default, it's going to give us the sum of the number of claims. But what we want to do is we want to change this from a sum. So we're going to select the arrow on the values bin for the sum of the number of claims, select value field settings, and rather than looking at the sum, we're actually going to use average and click OK. Now what you can see is that on average, females have slightly more claims than males. We can actually look at some other summary statistics here and look at the max. And you can see that the maximum number of claims is 33 for both males and females. We're going to go back to average. Now, one thing we may be interested in doing is actually determining if there is an association between the number of claims and the Medicare outpatient reimbursement. So let's actually come back to this sheet 1, and we're going to create a graphic. The way we're going to do this is we need to select the columns of data that we're interested in plotting. One of those columns is in column B, and if we highlight column B and then hold down the Control key and then scroll over to the Medicare reimbursement for outpatient, which is in column AB, you can select that column as well. What we're going to do is we're going to insert a scatter plot. So go to the Insert tab in Microsoft Excel, and under the Charts option, there's the option to insert a scatter plot. Now we're going to just include the default scatter plot, which is the first option here. And when we select that, you can see a clear association is beginning to form here. We're just going to move this graph off to the right-hand side of our data and maximize it. We're going to include additional information here. So if we just click onto this chart, and we can right-click onto the chart and select Add Trend Line. What that's going to do is include a best fit line on our scatter plot so we can identify the trend associated with Medicare reimbursement and the number of claims. To this trend line, what we actually want to do is also include information about the R-squared value, as well as the equation of the line. Why this information is relevant is it's going to provide information about the strength of the relationship between the outpatient Medicare reimbursement as well as the number of claims. And we do actually see a relatively strong association between the two variables. And that is, as the number of claims increases, we also see that the Medicare outpatient reimbursement increases. We can try to understand this in a variety of different ways. One way we might want to understand it is to segment the number of outpatient claims into a category of high utilizers and low utilizers. So how we're going to do that is, let's scroll back over here and let's include a new column of data in column C. And to begin, we're just going to look for some summary statistics here. The first summary statistic is we're going to look for the median of the number of claims. So the way we'll do that is we use the formula equals median in an open parentheses, and then select all of column B and close those parentheses. You'll note that our median is 1. If you recall, our mean, or average, for this column of data is 2.42. So one thing we may be interested in knowing is how to define something as a high utilizer. The way we can do this is we can actually look at the percentile ranking. We may want to identify what is our 90th percentile. And what this would tell us is 90% of the patients, or the beneficiaries in this case, 90% of the beneficiaries would have a number of claims equal to or less than the value at the 90th percentile. So the way we can do that is we can use the formula equals percentile in an open parentheses. Again, we select the entire column of B and a comma. Now here we want to include K, and K is the percentile that we want to obtain the value of. In this case, it's 90th percentile, so that would be 0.9. And what we see is that 7 is the value at the 90th percentile. What that means is 90% of our beneficiaries have 7 or fewer claims. We can actually change this 0.9 to 0.99 to get the 99th percentile. We see that that value is 14. So one thing we may want to do is count how many beneficiaries have a value equal to 90, equal to at the 90th percentile, which would be of a number of claims equal to 7, and how many have a value of number of claims equal to 14, which would be the 99th percentile. So we're going to put in equals, count if, open parentheses, and select this entire range of data. And then for our criteria, we're going to include a quotes, the less than sign, the equals sign, and a 7, then a close quotes, and a close parentheses. And then hit enter. So recall the total number of beneficiaries we have in the data is 116,353. We see that of those 116,353, that 105,347 have 7 or fewer claims. Now if we change this to 14, we see that 115,218 have claims, 14 or fewer claims. Now we can rearrange this formula a little bit. So we look at the opposite side of that. What about those with greater than 7 claims? There are 11,005 beneficiaries with 7 or more claims. And then if we look at 14, there are 1,134 beneficiaries with 14 or more claims. So what we're going to do is we're going to actually identify the super utilizers in this case. Given that our 90th percentile has 7 claims or fewer, and our 99th percentile is 14 claims or fewer. Let's actually use the value of more than 14 claims as an indicator of our superutilizers. So we're going to include another column here that's a superutilizer. And we're just going to identify if a beneficiary is a superutilizer or not. The way we're going to do that is we're going to create a category using the if function. So we're going to say equals if, open parentheses, and our logical test will be if the value in cell B2 is greater than 14, then if that argument for that logical test is true, which would mean that the value in B2 is greater than 14, we want the text Y to be returned. If that is false, we want the text N to be returned. And then close your parentheses and hit enter. And when we fill this formula in all the way to the bottom, you can see that in some cases, here's a superutilizer, here's a superutilizer. You can begin to identify those superutilizers. Now that we have this formula, we're actually going to copy and paste specialist values like we have done in the past, just to minimize the burden of the formulas. Now the next thing we're going to do is create a pivot table to count the number of superutilizers by chronic condition. Let's go back up here to our DSynPuff ID, or just click anywhere really into the data so that none of the columns are highlighted. Then go to Insert, Pivot Table, and click OK. Now what we're going to do is we're going to select one of the chronic conditions. Let's actually use diabetes as our first chronic condition. So we're going to select diabetes as a row variable. A 1 indicates that a beneficiary has diabetes, and 2 indicates the beneficiary does not have diabetes. Now what we can do is we can take this as our row variable, and we can move the DSynPuff ID into the values bin. And this will give us a count of the DSynPuff IDs. So we can see there are 44,000 beneficiaries with diabetes and 72,000 without diabetes. Now we're going to create a contingency table here where we move the indicator for the high utilizers as a column variable. So we actually don't see that column appear here. So what we're actually going to do is refresh this data. And now we see superutilizer appear. So we're going to move superutilizer to the columns bin. Now what do we see? Well, if you recall, there were approximately 1,134 superutilizers. How can this be explained? Well, potentially this could be explained largely by whether these beneficiaries have diabetes. So what we see is that when a patient has diabetes, they are more likely to be a superutilizer than if they do not have diabetes. So this explains the majority of our high superutilizers is the presence of diabetes increases the potential that the beneficiary will be a high utilizer. So what these results indicate is that in situations where a hospital may have patients or dealing with a patient population with diabetes, those specific patients, you may want to provide additional education around appropriateness of medical services and potentially reach out to the patients with diabetes to educate them on different ways of reaching their primary care provider and how to utilize outpatient services appropriately. Whether these outpatient visits were appropriate or not is not answered here. Therefore, this would also indicate a need for additional analyses to identify if the superutilizers are in fact utilizing outpatient services appropriately. What this example demonstrates is that claims data can be a powerful resource for population health analytics and certainly lead to more informed decisions on managing patients and patient populations.